We're back for season 6 of my podcast. I'm all about putting the human factor back into business by helping organisations become places where people are happy, well, and able to perform at their best. And that's what my guests shed light on with their expertise and experience. As those who know me will be very familiar with, my mantra is simple: get people right, get business right. And that means we'll be covering a whole range of topics that impact on employee experience, engagement and mental well-being. And many of you will know that I hate tick boxes. So we'll be kicking those out, getting beneath the surface of shiny new initiatives, stripping back layers of complexity and going back to the fundamentals of good business. That's the people. This series runs alongside the launch of Leadership Labs and Manager Labs that I'm excited to be facilitating with the fabulous Gemma Ellison of Heart Leadership. These are interactive and dynamic communities that turn typical L&D on its head. If you are a manager or leader and want an opportunity to problem solve, challenge the status quo, experiment and evaluate, all within a small supportive group, get in touch. More information and contact details are in the podcast notes. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist, psychotherapist and founder of It's Time for Change. Thank you for joining me on Beyond the Water Cooler. I have the absolute pleasure of sitting here with Stewart Codling, who's Chief Inspector for Thames Valley Police. And he's looking incredibly smart in his full uniform. So people who are listening to this rather than watching it, you need to go check out Stewart on YouTube, because I think you're the smartest dressed guest I've ever had. So thank you, Stewart. So James Butler introduced us, which is great.
Yes.
You've known James since school, and
yes.
So he shares some gossip about you. Actually, he hasn't. You shared gossip about him, which I have loved hearing about. And the reason I've invited you on, I'm not to share all the gossip, but is because you spoke recently at the Royal Foundation Mental Health Symposium.
Yes.
They've been running some training about healthy team culture. Tomorrow, I think I'm right in saying that you're off to Bryce Norton with some fancy
RAF Bryce Norton, yeah.
Health and Wellbeing Day. And you set up a men's forum in the Thames Valley Police, which currently has around 650 members. So it's fair to say that you know a thing or two about what's going on in the space around mental wellbeing and engaging employees, make sure that they're having the most meaningful experience. So I'm super pleased to have you here with me today, Stewart. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Tell me briefly about your role. So you're sitting there in your uniform. You were saying at the start you're definitely not a chief constable.
Definitely not. No.
So tell me a bit more about what it is that keeps you busy.
So my day-to-day role in Thames Valley Police is as the force lead for professionalising neighbourhood policing. So that's looking across the 3 counties of Thames Valley, Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Buckinghamshire, and looking at the way our neighbourhood teams engage with their communities, collaborate with partners, and then work together to solve those problems in local communities, whether that be a neighbourhood, a business community or whatever. So really looking to draw on regional and national best practice, good practice, and bring that into Thames Valley, and then across Thames Valley, looking at sharing what one area might be doing well, or looking to see where our gaps are and where we can best fill those and how we fill those gaps so that we are serving our communities as best we can.
And how long have you been in policing?
26 years. So five years longer than I've been with my wife. So yeah, August 97, I joined West Yorkshire. And then my father passed away in 99, which then led me to transfer back down. And it's one of those funny things, Lisa, as much as I'd have him back here in a heartbeat, to have my wife and my children and the life I've had in the last 20 odd years, I wouldn't change it. And that's a really strange thing to say, but brought me down to Thames Valley, and one might say, never look back. I go back every now and again, but
Like I said, as you never look back, as you said, that you have a great big smile on your face. It's like twinkle in your eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was all my friends from West Yorkshire will say, and he's a Southern boy anyway. I was from Newbury, and I travelled up there and enjoyed their hospitality for 12 years. Learnt my trade up there. It's such a good place to learn policing, and then to come back home as such to Berkshire and then police my own patch. Has just been has been great, and has allowed me that that understanding, I suppose, about the impact that policing has on my family, on my children. So like I say, it's an odd one, because that losing my father was the biggest milestone I've ever had to get across. But yeah, I wouldn't change what I've got now for the world.
How long have you been Chief Inspector?
About 4.5 years. So the 2.5 years in our what we call a contact management unit, which is the department that deals with those phone calls coming in from the public, and then looks to deploy officers. And then the last 2 years in this current role.
So what got you so interested in this space around mental well-being and mental health?
I think it definitely started with a friend of mine who's he's a police inspector, and he was closely linked to a military charity called the Pilgrim Bandits, and they were all about supporting their staff, their veterans that had come back, some with significant trauma. I mean, horrendous trauma and injuries. But their mantra was all about that, always a little bit further, and it was about pushing each other and using each other's experience as a way of supporting other people at the same time, allowing you to look inwardly and get that strength to carry on. And he progressed that and now runs a small police charity called the Curtis Palmer Programme, which is named after a Dorset officer that the military charity supported back in 2011. Curtis was only in his late 20s and had a brain tumour, and they enabled him to jump from an airplane. And he couldn't say thank you to them because the tumour had spread to his esophagus, but they knew, and his mum was able to tell them, that they'd given him back that sense of control over his life. So we carry his name quite fondly. I never met him. I've been lucky enough to meet his parents, but yes. So Damien was the sort of one to get me involved, and he's an absolute stalwart in supporting our colleagues, our peers, and looking after each other. And I suppose from there it just kind of grew. We had, I think, 5 tragic losses in about 3 years of officers, some who died by suicide, and others who died during the course of duty or on the way home from work. And it was just a conversation with the chief constable to say, I think we've reached that point, sir, where we need it. We need something. And from there it was born. That was just over 2 years ago, and we've progressed from there.
So I'm really curious to know how, because as an outsider to the police force, people, I think, often assume the police to be quite tough. A lot of people, you have to be quite tough doing the job you do.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to know how your interest in this and how much time you spend investing in this has changed you in terms of how you are in the police, and how that kind of sits
alongside that, you know, are you someone who's just always a very caring person? Do you have to switch on and off that kind of that tough side and that caring side? And how does that kind of fit?
I think my family and my friends would say I probably always did have an element of that. You can't see, but I'm 6'8" and I'm 19 stone, and I probably am one of those classic big blokes who the last thing I want to do is get into a fight. The last thing I want is conflict. I just want to sit down and enjoy myself, enjoy my time with my friends. Over the last 26 years, it's helped me. You know, I've been that guy, that bloke, the copper, who thought he was indestructible, walking through a pub door into a massive fight. I don't need to wait for backup and just go in, or go into any kind of public disorder kind of situation. And that's still the case, Lisa. I think it's one of the important messages I try and sort of talk about when I talk to the men, is that it's not about me losing that strength, that sense of who I am as a policeman, who I am as Stewart Codling. It's not about me displacing that and bringing in other things. It's about me layering up some other skills and traits, if you like, on top of it that actually enable me to manage, especially in our world. I think I said to you when we met before that I got to a point in the job where I told my staff, we have a policy with sudden unexpected deaths where as a supervisor you're expected to go to the scene, because as the experienced one, I cast my eye over it. As an ex-detective, I know the signs to look for, because we need to make some decisions as to whether we need to involve an investigation team or whether, if there's nothing untoward, we can just support the family through the coronial process. But I told my team I'd seen enough. I'd seen enough dead people, and I didn't need to see any more. And I think that's the bit, I suppose. When I look back, I think there are those moments where that was probably me starting to mature a little bit in terms of those other traits. Yeah, I definitely talk to the guys a lot about the fact that this isn't removing your strengths, those obvious strengths that you talk to, and you're right to mention. You know, policing does have a place where it needs to use force. That can look like a lot of different things, but being compassionate, being kind, showing vulnerability aren't weaknesses. They're strengths that I think, you know, will allow us to have, certainly with the guys, those conversations about the issues that, like I said, we started with some real tragedies of losing men to suicide. Well, if we can't talk about that, if we can't broach the subject, if we can't sit and listen to someone, or feel that I can sit in silence and I'll talk when I'm ready, then we're going to suffer even more. And
I think part of the value in terms of what you're doing is that you're someone from within the force who has decided you're interested in this, and you've, I guess, upskilled yourself and gained the knowledge,
yeah,
to be able to relate to your workforce. And I think, you know, some people think they've got to be an expert to talk about mental health, whatever. And actually, you're a layperson who's just opening the conversation and normalizing it.
And I think, yeah, that's another really important point. And I mentioned that to the symposium, and that was one of those moments where I'm trying to think, how do I cover off 20 minutes talking to a room? And I just think that's really important for people to know. It's really important for the men that I talk to know. I don't judge. I'm not there to say anything about the situation they're going through or what they're feeling. I'm not an expert. I come with that understanding, I think, and that empathy of being a man, and being a man who's made those mistakes and probably will carry on making those mistakes. So I think that's really important. And I think, when we look at what's on offer, and when I talk about Thames Valley Police, we have some amazing existing frameworks and support mechanisms that are out there. I can phone 24/7 for counselling. I can get advice about gambling. I can go to someone about bereavement. But I know that's sometimes, for some men, that's not what they need. And having that ear of someone who is probably to a certain degree very much alike, and struggling the same to explain things away. That's why sometimes even now I'm clumsy, because it's tricky. It's not entirely natural. It doesn't feel that way.
But I think actually, I think it comes across as being natural, because clumsy is natural. When people are word perfect and they know exactly what they're saying, it's almost too polished.
Yeah.
And when we are just feeling our way, and we don't know what's going to be said next or what's going to happen next.
No.
And you really immerse yourself in that space with that person, and you're curious and you're open-minded, it's going to be a bit clumsy. And I think that shows genuine care, because it's not textbook. You're not opening a book and saying, right, you just mentioned that you've got these sorts of thoughts or behaviors, that this is now the protocol. It's like get rid of that, and let's just be a bit more human about it.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. And I think, when I look back at some of the work that we've been involved in over the last 2 years, some of the events that we've gone to, some of the conversations we've had, sometimes you think, we've held webinars. We've now got our own podcast, which is amazing.
In a minute, I know.
And sometimes I think, I look at the numbers on the webinar and think there's only 30, there's only 40 people. It's quite low. We're an organisation of 8,500 people. There's 4,500 men that I'm not reaching. And then you get the phone call or the email around the back, and somebody says that, thanks. And we've had some incredible conversations with small numbers. But when you're talking about preventing a tragedy like suicide, it's one. That's all, I think that's what keeps us going, because sometimes it's hard work. It's hard work. It's hard work motivating myself. And I know the other members of the committee feel the same. It can be hard work talking to the men. It can be hard work getting past some people who don't think that there is a need or a space where men need this stuff. And that's men and women that I've come up against. That and that's probably another conversation. But that's that bit where the one thing I've really learned, and I try and steer clear of, is that this isn't a competition. This isn't about my time now. Isn't me taking time away from, we've got a brilliant women's network chaired and run by a brilliant woman, and their focus is very much on development and the fact that there are those inequalities that still exist within policing, as there are in a lot of things. We get on really well. She is one of our biggest advocates because she gets it, and she knows that in the work that we do, and one of our pillars is about male allyship, but in the work that we do just generally around mental health, around suicide, around physical well-being, well, you're going to get better men. You're going to get healthier men, happier men. And then there's that just knock-on impact to everything else. So when you talk about equity in the workplace, it's easier for me then to have a conversation with a man about those inequalities that exist. about the issues. You know, in my training today, we were talking about misconduct and some of the things, the reoccurring problems that happen, the reoccurring issues that our women members of staff face. Well, those conversations become easier if I'm talking to a man who's in a good place, who's comfortable and relaxed and healthy. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you talk about, and I don't know if it is a gender difference or if it's about being a police officer. I remember when we met the last time, you talked about wearing a cape, and it's that notion of, and if you're in the police, you're there to look after people.
Yeah.
Sort of save other people and do what's right by them, and actually it's about turning inwards and looking at yourself. Yeah. People don't necessarily do that because they haven't got time for that. They're too busy looking after everyone. No. Is that a balance?
No. Yes, it is. Yeah, and one of the initiatives we've brought in, I'm really thrilled with this one, is that we deliver 2 hours of dynamic breath work and cold water therapy. That's an offer for every employee in Thames Valley Police at the moment for the next 12 months. And it's a practice that I have found just simply to be liberating in terms of my mental balance. But they talk about self-care. That's the phrase they talk about, self-care. And I can see it in people's faces when I say self-care. They're like, nah, it's not why we're here. We're not here for that. And I get that. There is that sense, you know, that, and I want people to know that, again, that none of this detracts from me coming out and doing my job. I promise you it doesn't. What it does is enable me to do it longer. It enables me to maintain and manage the repetitive nature of seeing horrible things time and time again. But yeah, that sense of there's value in self-care, there's value in taking that time. You know, I think some get it, and we have people who got really good regimes in terms of gym, in terms of nutrition, fitness. We talk about sleep a lot because that's key. You know, it's one thing. I talk to my kids a lot about sleep. You know, it's, again, this is just learning all the time that if there's one thing you need to do well, it's sleep, and get that sleep. And especially if you're working a shift pattern where it just messes with your body. Yeah, the self-care bit, and, you know, even getting people to understand that 20 minutes, we're not talking hours and hours, we're talking small chunks, but put that time in. And a lot of that is about that self-reflection, is, you know, whether you like going walking, whether you like going running, you know, that they all work. They really do. It's just selling it to people that it's worthwhile.
I hear what you're saying, because I spend a lot of my time working with leaders who and talking about self-care, and they all say, I don't have time for that. You know, actually, if you made the time for it, you'd be a better leader, you'd be a better person, because you'd feel more energized, you'd have better health, and you would be more productive, and, you know, your performance would be better, and everything changes. But and as you say, we're talking 20 minutes, and the self-care doesn't have to be, I love that you're doing breath work and cold water and so on, but some people think it's not my thing. To say just going for a walk, or it's just creating that space, isn't it, to be able to reflect, to be able to just press pause on life and all the demands that are made of people.
And the thing that's, you know, we talk in some areas of policing, and lots of areas of policing now are very good at debriefing. So you find time after an incident to discuss what happened, how did that go, did we achieve our objective, which is primarily to save people or look after people. Yeah, we did. This wasn't quite so good, or and we really go into that in fine detail, and we spend time doing that. And it's right that we do. We learn from that. At the same time, for someone to be able to diffuse and really go through a situation that they've just been in, this is where, for me, I look back and think, if I could take some of the public with me on a day and show you what it's like to go from, so 7 o'clock in the morning, and the first job is something like, I don't know, you got to go to someone's house to tell them that their child has died. You got to go to someone's house to tell them that someone in their family has passed away. Your next job, once you've done that, is can you go to take a statement from someone who's been subject to violent behaviour by her partner, has been beaten black and blue. You go and take a statement, and then we go on through the day, and that's just one day. They're not all like that. They're not. But that's the kind of impact, and that's the level it's at. So to get some time back in order to digest what you've just seen, what you've just been to, because otherwise it becomes very robotic. And then, I think people talk about, there's a proper word. This is why I'm not an expert. Lack of empathy. We lose our sense of empathy. We just become very
hardened
to it. Exactly that. And I think for me, that's the bit in policing that I think stands us out from maybe other international police forces, is that I will take my rig off and I'll sit and I'll make you a cup of tea, and we will have that chat, and we will take that time to do the extra things, because it's horrible what's just happened, and we get that, but we don't want to lose that. So, but that self-care, I think you're right. I think in terms of me, if I'm thinking about my teams, the best teams that I've worked with have been those teams that, that we're not off sick, not because I'm telling them they can't go off sick, but because they're not sick, because we're managing it, because we know it's going to come, we know it's going to happen. That's the job. We know that, and but important we have those conversations, and then just we cater for it. So that, like you say, just those little chunks of time or something at the end of a shift to make sure we all come together, or a number of us come together in order that we can manage it.
But I think so much of what you just said there, Stuart, is such good practice that should be modelled in any industry. So what you've just described in terms of empathy and compassion and creating space to talk about the challenges that you know are coming up because they're part of what happens in that role, and just having a debrief, that is stuff that should be happening in any organisation. That comes back to that space, and that's treating people like human beings rather than just cogs in a bigger process. I agree, and I think, like I said, I think we've definitely come a long way, Lisa. When I think back, and I don't criticise the people that I worked with back in '97 or early 2000s. It's just a different space. We do it well on occasion. We do, and I think big events. Policing is, we're super good at dealing with big events and the aftermath of big events. I think it's that layering of one after the other. Those are the ones where it's tricky. How do you capture what the impact for me was, in going to a sudden death? If two of us go, do we both feel the same? Do we both? Does it have the same impact on both of us? I don't know, but I did see I saw a fantastic matrix. I meant to look it up before we started this. The symposium you mentioned, I think it was Scottish Fire Service, had come up with a matrix which allows their staff to capture almost on a weekly basis exactly that. So it has a list of the sort of impactive incidents that the staff can go to, and then it just allows you to record, right, okay, this is what, and then at the end of the week you can actually see on this matrix what you've been to, but importantly, me as your supervisor, I can see and get that holistic view and go, oh, I didn't realise, wow, that I think it was the fire. It might have been
search and rescue, but I'll dig it up anyway. But I just thought
it sounds so powerful, because it is the information you need, and if there's a way of capturing that and just understanding what other people's experience is. I think for me, when I'm talking with leaders and their teams, there's one of the common themes that comes up is people don't understand what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
There's this assumption that I'm busier than they are, or I've got a worse experience than they have. And you think, no idea what's going on. So if you can find a way of, if you can't do it through conversations, doing it through a matrix, or finding some way of just communicating, this is actually what my day's been like and my week's been like. It increases empathy and compassion and those connections between people and team. I think it was really powerful.
But it almost goes back to your point that you said about the self-care, because the matrix is only as good as what I write down on it. And if I think I've got the cape on and I'm not going to tell you where that's had an impact on me, then it's not going to show anything. So, but no, I think there are things we can definitely do better. Like I say, I think we've come a heck of a long way in policing, and it is even sometimes talking and sharing. And I say to my wife that there is one element that I have never shared with anyone, and I never will share with anyone, because it's to me it's the absolute extreme of what we deal with, and that's it. And I kind of, that's where I think I've learned to, and I think everyone in policing and everyone outside of policing that deals with this kind of stuff has, there is that bit of self-responsibility, of onus on us to come up with, how do I manage that? How do I get myself through that? I'm happy to box that one up, Lisa. And keep that for myself.
You know what I like we were just saying about self-responsibility, because I think I've been talking to a company this week about the big wellbeing project, and they're talking about where's the boundary between managers and leaders' responsibility workforce, individual employees' responsibility for themselves, and there needs to be that conversation around as an organisation and as managers and leaders, we can set up different support structures, and we can make sure that people have the right knowledge and the right skills and so on. But at the end of the day, it relies on individuals to engage in a way that is responsible, and that they are taking ownership, and they're doing the right thing by themselves and by others. So I think I think that's a really good point you've made. I would love to hear a bit about what you do, because you've mentioned a couple of times that things are changing, practices changing. And you are doing things now which are about helping people, I guess, take off their cape a little bit. So you mentioned already the podcast. I listened to the podcast yesterday. It was fantastic. Honestly, I was laughing. I was in the kitchen cooking. My daughter came with what's going on, because I was laughing. I was nearly crying. Listening to Loz talk about facing death because of pancreatic cancer. I loved, what you're saying about being clumsy earlier. It was that sense of, this is an authentic conversation. There was literally belly laughter, and then there were tears, and there was that realization we didn't have any tissues in the room because we haven't come prepared for that. So it was a real conversation. But I thought it was so incredibly powerful.
Thank you. It's something we two of the committee came up with the idea for the podcast a while ago, and again, as typical blokes, it's just taken ages for us to get it done. But we came up with the idea of the branding is the kettle is always on. So the idea was, it's telling our men, it's telling everyone in policing that someone is here all the time. There is never a time that's not convenient. And that's the beauty, actually, of us being 24/7, because pretty much there will be one of us who's working through the night, who'll be on shift. But the kettle is always on podcast was about bringing together our people to talk to our people. So was very much that view of serving police officers who were willing to talk about their experiences. And Loz East, who's a sergeant in Oxford, 46, 47 years old, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and just told that, you know, that's it. There's nothing that can be done. So we sat and spoke to him for 2.5 hours. And you're right, it was one of those moments that there were 4 of us and we were all in tears, crying tears. And it was that realization that it's typical blokes, no tissues, no hankies, nothing. And then there were those tears of laughter. And I think for me, I'd listened back to it. We went live with that one last week in Thames Valley. So that was a really pleasing moment for me to get that podcast out, especially because we recorded it, I want to say maybe 6 months ago. And I didn't know whether he was still going to be alive when we released it. So that the pressure has been on. I really wanted it to go live so that he could hear it and get that feedback from his peers, from his mates, to say, I've heard your podcast. Wow. And so that was really nice. And yeah, we've got 3 more lined up for this year. We've kind of limited ourselves because this is all done, outside of our day jobs. So the next one is with one of our officers who manages suicidal thoughts. And that's going to be pretty amazing, I think. And we've also got a chap called Matt Williams, who's one of our fantastic kind of supporters from outside of policing. He worked for Samaritans for many, many years, and is Oxfordshire based now. But he's going to talk with John, the officer, about suicide, and then we've got some others that talk about the worst day of our career, our lives. And not an officer who lost his leg when he was driven at and over by somebody trying to escape arrest. And it's all about, Lisa, it's like I said to you about the charity right at the start. It's very much not using those people, that's the wrong word, but working with them to tell their story about how they have overcome that prognosis of pancreatic cancer, how they've overcome the fact that they're probably going to have suicidal thoughts for the rest of their lives, how they've overcome the fact that I've lost a leg and I can't be the policeman that I was chasing baddies on the streets of Maidenhead. And Tom's story, who's going to talk to that, is now an inspector in our force control room. And it's an incredible story of overcoming that moment, that trauma, and really talking to our guys about those other strengths, So, and we talk about it the way that we know to talk about it, which is pretty head on, pretty blunt and to the point.
And I think that's the power of it, because it's the kind of conversation you could just imagine you're in the pub having just a good conversation. It wasn't like a topic, like an interview style formal conversation. It was a natural conversation, and I think it really normalized how, not easy, because it wasn't an easy conversation, I'm guessing, to have, but how actually you can have these conversations and it's okay. And they might, there's no happy, it's not about happy endings. It's not about just hearing. And I think when the value in that, one of the presenters had said at the end that he went to GP, hearing what Loza said, he recognised that something wasn't right for him, and he went to the GP and he got checked out and realised that there was some things that he could change. And you just think that's the power of just hearing stories, hearing how they cope. It's kind of the resilience, it's the strengths and so on, and actually just communicating that to others. Speak up, have a voice.
Yeah.
And when you can talk about it with your peers, it's great because there's such a camaraderie there. It's amazing. But also people go and get professional help when they need it.
Yeah, definitely. And the other place it helps is I shared it with my deputy chief constable, who, I'm not just saying this, he is a lovely man. And he's taken forward a bit of work for us to get prostate screening testing done for our men. So we're looking to get funding for that. Like I said, we've got over 4,500 men in the organisation. Not all will be of the age, but I've had my test done, came home like a proud schoolboy showing that my result. Check me out. And they even tested my cholesterol when I was there. But that came directly from sharing the podcast and the deputy chief constable hearing Loz talk about his situation, and then, okay, yeah, why wouldn't I take on this bit if we can prevent or catch early? It's a different cancer, but again, it's not a competition. If we can catch people early with prostate cancer, then how great would that be? Yeah, many benefits to it. And yeah, like you say, that's exactly what we wanted, was just that. We had to go through a few edits because it wasn't scripted.
I can imagine, just from what I heard, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I kept pressing the pause button when my kids walked into the room. Can people outside of Thames Valley Police listen to it? Is that okay? So I can put a link in the show notes or not? Is it just?
No, at the moment, not. No, I'm having that conversation because we do have a Spotify account, and we do have people who are advanced enough to know how to do that and run that. That won't be me. And we do want to put it out there on Spotify. It's a really interesting conversation because there are in almost every other police force in the country, there are groups similar to ours who are either just starting out or just talking about that conversation or just having that awkward chat with their senior officers at the moment about why is it needed. They're just getting over that. And I really want to share the podcast with them as well. But yeah, I think it's one of those.
When it does go on Spotify, let me know.
Yeah.
I'll definitely share that. So what else are you doing there? Because I know we talked about, obviously you've got the breath work and the cold water podcast. I think you mentioned before you're also doing some webinars.
Yeah, so we do. So in between the podcasts, we use the same branding. The kettle is always on, and we run some really simple MS Teams calls, live calls for about half an hour, 45 minutes at a time, and basically just pick a topic. So it might be men's health related, but we've also gone out to our other support networks. So the Thames Valley Women's Network, Christian Police Association, Muslim Police Association, all the different networks to say, come and use us and come and sit and talk to not only your members, but talk to everyone as well, because those issues will transcend across. And so we've got our next one is next week. I've got our head of investigations for our professional standards department and the Police Federation coming to talk about male behaviours at Christmas, because it's a time when things can go wrong. It's one of those seasonal moments. It's, we have drink drive campaigns at Christmas because we know people drink more and take risks that they shouldn't take. And looking inwardly, we know that we want the right people working for police. We want the right people in Thames Valley Police. But if there are people who are making mistakes, we want to be able to get hold of them early. If they're still the right people for policing, then we can work with them. Then we can educate them and support them through. But so the conversation next week will all be about Christmas, staying safe at Christmas, and showing those appropriate behaviours, reminding officers that on or off duty, you have a responsibility to the uniform, to the code of ethics that we work to those values. And then in the new year, we've got some other webinars coming up, like I said, with some of the other networks who want to talk about their issues, and I think that's great.
And it is all making a difference, because you told me, which is a great story, about you in the car with two of your male colleagues, and whereas you've been chatting about the rugby and stuff, however many hours talking about the menopause.
I mean, that was surreal, all the way down to where were we going? Cardiff, South Wales, and it was literally the moment we met each other at Cheveley Services, just on the M4 by Newbury, and literally within 5 minutes we're talking about the menopause, and when we got there, I think it was one of those moments. I think that the chap in the back was kind of taken to start with, but then he was fully immersed in the conversation. And it's one of those where, I've definitely had eyebrows raised to me by friends outside of policing, by people inside of policing, say, why are you talking about the menopause? And I'm, it's so obvious, isn't it? Because half of my team are women, and some of them might be coming up to the menopause, or I'm not forcing a conversation on people, don't get me wrong here, but what I'm doing is just informing myself enough so that if I see some signs, or if I hear something, then I can engage properly in the conversation. And the fact that the chap in the back on the way down told us that we could get discount for the medication that both of our wives were buying, that's not cheap. We were like, well, that's the best thing about opening up this conversation, is we're saving some money. But yeah, it's one of those where I think it does put some men off engaging in the conversation, Lisa, sometimes, is that worry about how we're perceived. And talking about menopause, I come back to that image of being that roughy tufty cop who kicks down doors and chases people in cars, etc., etc. Doesn't really go with that, but actually it does make me a much better copper, not just internally, but if I'm going out into people's houses and I'm dealing with women a lot who are subject to domestic violence, well, what a difference in terms of my response, and like you said, the empathy that I can show. Not a conversation that we were expecting.
Do you think, because you can train people to spot signs that someone's struggling, but like we were saying earlier, individuals have also got to take responsibility for as long as the environment's right. Do you think having the kinds of conversations that you're having via your webinars and podcasts and everything else that we're doing will help those people who are still determined to keep their mask on and not let anyone know really what's going on? Do you think that's going to start shifting things for them over time? Just like you said, that there was somebody back at the car who wasn't going to engage, and then because you and some person are just chatting about it, it's like, actually it feels okay to talk about it.
I think there will probably always be those people that just carry on under the mask, whatever that mask is, whether that's policing or not policing. I think there will always be people that are very much in that camp and won't change their view. I think that greater portion of people will listen, will engage, and we'll take some of it, and it's like we said about the breath work, right? That's not for everyone. Getting in a barrel of cold water at 6:30 in the morning is not for everyone. I get that. But at least if you take the sentiment from it, then I think that's as much as we can ask. But yeah, for those blokes, and we know that there are those men within policing, outside of policing, who probably won't engage. I'm not going to say we'll give up and stop, but I think you have to put your energies where you're going to get the most reward from them. Sometimes, and it's not always, listening to myself talk there, it's not always a bad reason why people have those masks up. It's not because they're remaining ignorant, or because then they're denying something, or there might be another reason, which is why I think it's so crucial that we don't just stop and carry on.
You can't have a blanket approach, can you? You've got
no.
You've got to create the right opportunities, the right experience for people.
Yeah.
To open up and share if they want to, but actually not insist, because as you say, some people want to have that mask on because that's their way of coping in that environment, and actually often outside of work with other people.
Yeah, definitely.
I think what was also interesting in the podcast that Loz talked about with some humour, wrapping his car around a tree, after falling asleep after shift, and I thought, he talked about it in a very again, it was kind of one of those messages that's delivered with a kind of humour, and it's like, wow, this is just a really frank conversation, but it also drives home really important messages about shift work, for example. And I was thinking about how many of the examples, you talked today about examples that's specific to policing, such as what you're seeing and experiences you go to and so on. But I think also there's so much of the police are human beings who have the same financial worries, relationship concerns, all this, things that are very similar to the wider society. So I think it's again, we have to break down that idea that the police are this invincible group of people, a bit like with leaders in an organisation or whatever. We're very good at kind of putting people into a box and saying, well, they're the people who will behave like that, and they're tougher than the rest of us, or they don't have these same worries, and actually you do.
Very much. And I think we've had some, like I said at the start, some really tragic losses, and I kind of look back and remember driving back from Reading on the M4 to Newbury, and then all of a sudden you've gone past your turn off, but you can't remember going past the turn off, and they're horrible moments, and that you look at that self-responsibility, and I feel tired. Should I be driving? Should I be doing this? It's very easy after the moment to say, that build-up of working shifts, that build-up, that layering of stuff that's going on during the shift, and then everything, like you say, that's going on in the normal world. Because financially, we face the same worries. We face the same issues. I think, in a way, and on the odd occasion I work from home. Sometimes I put the uniform on, because even though people aren't seeing me, once I put the uniform on, I feel different about what I'm doing. I hope that doesn't sound really weird, but it is an identifying part of me, and it is part of me that if I were to walk out the front of my house now, I would feel very differently than if I was just in my hoodie. I'd still be, I'm the archetypal copper. You can't miss me, because I'm still looking for stuff. I'm still picking stuff up. They look dodgy. That looks wrong. But we are absolutely vulnerable to everything that you and everyone else and my wife and everyone is vulnerable to.
And I think you made a really good point earlier that you might have two people going to the same incident, and you don't know how they're going to react. You don't know what from it, because in reality, we all have very different experiences. Unique experiences outside of work. And actually, we don't know how resilient someone is. If they've had a terrible night's sleep the night before, or they've got particular concerns which are weighing heavily on them, then they're less resilient to whatever happens at work. So I think that care at an individual level is so important. So I'd love to sort of, as we wrap up, think about advice. Like, what would be your key nuggets of information to take away, or things that you can get other people to think about doing differently if they really want to show their workforce that they care, and that actually prioritizing self-care and mental well-being is important?
I think you've genuinely got to stop, put down everything that you're doing and go and sit with your staff and go through and really understand what it is they're going through. You know, we sit and I sit. Sometimes my force-wide role, you know, I look at that overarching policy. I'm not on the ground doing the operational side of things. I think you need to put down what you're doing and go and see what they're going through and really remind yourself of those of how difficult it is. And as good as your policies and process might be at speeding things up or making things more efficient, certainly in policing terms, doesn't change the fact that the person I've just been to see who's been violently assaulted and killed it's horrible. You can't take that picture away. So I think it's really important that you do spend time, you do listen, Lisa, not go with an idea and just say, well, this is how it's going to be. You actually listen to your staff, and then show that you have listened. You know, and it's tricky in you know, we're public service, and we're very acutely aware that everything we spend, my time and everything else we spend, is public money. So we're really aware of that. At the same time, like we said before, if you want the best from your people, if you really want trusting people who feel valued coming through, then you have to invest in them. But yeah, I think that bit about actually spending time, we are people, and actually getting someone to come and sit with me and just listen to what I'm saying. Like I said about my deputy chief constable, it might be a 5-minute phone call, but to see his name come up on your phone and then hear him ask a question and then shut up and not say anything else and take away something, that means the world. And that shows me that level of care, which then means I'll carry on doing what I'm doing. I'll carry on being clumsy and awkward at times and do that bit. I don't mind. Yeah, and I think it's that humility piece that I've become comfortable with, I think, which is why I'm not, you know, my kids laugh. I did, when I did the symposium the other week, I did a bit of breath work. Or I thought I'll do an actual bit of breath work with the audience. We'll do 2 minutes of breath work, fundamental breathing, just calm it down, just to show them. And I thought I'll just try it. I'll just talk it through with my wife and my daughter just to see. I need to time it. And they were in stitches on the sofa. And I was like, well, I ain't going to do this, am I? Why am I going to go do this if everyone's going to laugh at me? But then when I did it up on stage, and I'm obviously got my eyes open, but everyone closed everyone's eyes down and took them through some fundamental breath work, they all did it. And it was incredible. And a couple of the people, senior people there, came up to me afterwards and said, it was the best part of my day. I feel so chilled and relaxed. But it is that humility piece to say that going into someone's house and protecting them and saving their life or just stopping someone from hurting them, that's the important stuff. And that's where I've got to get it absolutely nailed on right. And that's what I'm really bothered about. If I make a fool of myself with this stuff, I really don't care. If it gives someone the confidence to talk about suicidal thoughts, to open up about having issues in their relationship, whatever it is, then yeah, I think, going back to your question, that's the kind of stuff that I would want to see from my leaders.
That is awesome advice. And not to take feedback from your wife and daughter. I love that. I think that is an awesome place to finish, Stuart. I do have one more question, which is going to take us completely off tangent now, because this is a blind question, which has nothing to do with anything we talked about today. So Sarah Cockcroft, who is a phenomenal leader and I spoke to her recently on the podcast. She's given me a blind question, which I think is a brilliant one for you, because I don't think I've ever been asked this before. If you were a biscuit, which would you be and why?
I'm a fig roll. 100% a fig roll. I think it's one of those. It's almost. I've not come across many people who like fig rolls, and when I do, the connection is so strong. Yeah, maybe that's not the best description of me, but that was who I would want to be, a fig roll. Yeah.
I was impressed with how quickly you came up with that, Stuart. Maybe have given that thought.
Cops, tea and biscuits. It's still, you can change a lot of things. Technology moves on. Tea and biscuits, it's still
Stuart,
top of the list.
Thank you very, very much for your time today, because it has been such an awesome conversation. I've loved what you've said. I've loved how you actually got across really important messages. And I'm hoping that will make people think twice about their approach to, we're too senior or we don't need this stuff. It's like, actually, but you in your role, kind of, shouting about this particular agenda and getting really behind it and doing it in a really, really authentic way, which I think is what makes all the difference. People relate. We've seen that today. So thank you ever so much. And keep us posted with your podcast and things like that.
Yes, we'll do.
Share that. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. I invite you to think about one thing that you will take away to think about or do differently. I'd be really grateful if you can give me a thumbs up on Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and for an extra brownie point, leave me a short review. I'm really keen to help drive real change for better practice in the world of people at work, and spreading the message will help that. I'd love you to also join the club to stay in the loop and be the first to hear about exciting things that I'm developing, including free downloadable resources. Please do reach out to me directly to discuss the topics covered on this podcast, or perhaps other challenges around people at work. And if we're not already acquainted on LinkedIn, please connect. All the links you need are in the show notes. So until next time, bye for now.